A very warm welcome to the Great British Breakfast. We've just finished our domestic and we can now bring in the rest of the news. Now, scientists say climate change means we'll experience more extreme weather events in our lifetime, but how can we prepare for the worst when it actually comes?
Well, the government's outlined a record £5.2 billion investment over the next 6 years into flooding protection and recovery schemes. Flooding expert Simon Crowther is here in the studio with us right now. Simon, good morning. Thanks for coming in. Just talk to us about climate change and how it can lead to flooding, first of all.
Well, as the climate's warming, the atmosphere is able to hold more moisture, which means we get more intense rainfall in shorter periods of time. But talking about climate change and the impacts of flooding, it was actually really interesting, sat watching before the advert break, the talk of the mental health impact of sport and actually how we're starting to recognise that more. Because historically, flooding has really been looked at by the government as just a financial impact, an inconvenience. And there's been a real paradigm shift towards actually really starting to recognise the emotional trauma that flooding can cause. Some of the insurance companies now, I think Aviva is one of them, actually include within their plan an allowance for counselling after a flood event because the impacts are so severe.
But we in the media are very good at covering the story at the moment, and then the focus is off. People's lives are wrecked, and they can't just move back into their homes, can they? We're talking about months, often years.
And I would say the media are only really good at covering river flooding because you guys have warning about it. We all have more warning. We know the river's going to flood. We've got a couple of days. You can send a camera crew up there, you get some good shots, you know, people being rescued in lifeboats. And actually the surface water flooding, which is what we're seeing more of at the minute, there's no sort of warning system for that. We're reliant on Met Office heavy weather, you know, storm as we had yesterday. So you guys don't have.
You're talking about sort of flash flooding.
Yeah, flash flooding. So flash flooding, we call surface water flooding in the industry. That has very limited warning. So you guys don't have time to get a TV crew there. So I've always sort of said that's the ignored aspect of flooding, but it actually impacts more people than the whole of the other types of flooding put together. So flash flooding affects more people than river, coastal, all put together.
And because you went through this, didn't you?
Yeah.
You went through a very devastating flooding experience, which is why you know exactly firsthand, and also, as you said, the emotional and mental health aspects of this as well, which a lot of us can't fathom, really.
We just saw some pictures of actually my house when it was flooded in 2007. And we were out of the house for 9 months. As you know, I mentioned earlier, the insurance claim, there was a lot of focus on finances. It was a 6-figure insurance claim to repair the damage.
That's your house, is it?
That was my house in 2007. So we were out of the house for 9 months. This is sort of inside. You can see the kitchen, fridge has sort of floated out from where it was.
And you can't smell, presumably, what that smelt like as well.
I mean, we were fortunate because it was a rural area, so it was sort of mostly agricultural. But what we've seen in London is just horrendous with the sewers surcharging. But, you know, as the climate's changing, we're seeing it more and more. There was flooding yesterday horrendously on the Isle of Wight, and an elderly couple had to be rescued. So, you know, I would stress the dangers of floodwater. Don't drive into floodwater. It's, you know, we need a real awareness campaign about the dangers of this.
Now, bad enough at any time, but with the pandemic, of course, huge complications if you are unfortunate enough to be flooded.
Yeah, I mean, there's still supply chain issues in terms of getting hold of materials to get people recovered as quickly as possible. But last year, one of the things we really saw was people who'd been flooded in the terrible storms in the February. Then we went into lockdown in the March, so they'd actually been sort of moved into hotels because their houses were uninhabitable. All of a sudden the hotels were closed and they were sent back to these homes with no heating, no hot water, some cases no electric, which is why as an industry, you know, we can't, as much as the government have announced more money for flooding, we can't engineer.
Well, it's £860 million. It's not a small amount.
No, it's not a small amount.
But money won't.
But we can't engineer our way out of a nature climate crisis. We need to start adapting our behaviours and make our homes more resilient so that if you are in a flood risk area and, you know, the worst does happen and you're not able to keep the water out, it's very much more a case of you've kept yourself safe because you've had a good flood plan, and then you're able to come down, mop up and get back to normal the same afternoon rather than having 9 months of trauma.
Okay. It's really good to talk.
Yeah, and I was going to say just quickly, I mean, do you think the government are with this funding, are they taking it seriously enough? I mean, are they realise that we have major climate change issues.
Yeah.
I mean, there's going to be a consultation, is there, in the autumn?
Yeah, and there's been a shift lately as well with Flood Re, which is the government-backed insurance policy, so that people in flood risk areas should be able to get affordable insurance. The problem is that ends towards about 2039, and then it moves to a free market.
Yeah.
So by then we could be in a tricky situation. So they've just announced actually now that they'll be looking at when a property's been flooded, it's build back better, so trying to make it more resilient.
Right.
But to any viewer, I would urge after this, they go on the Environment Agency's free website, put in their postcode and check their flood risk, because 67% of people don't know their flood risks.
Really?
And we keep seeing, storm warnings, but that doesn't necessarily alert people if they don't know what their real flood risk is.
Simon, really good to talk to you about it. Simon Crowther, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, yes, something to